Welcome back, everybody, to Sunday School Dropouts. I was going to say another episode, another season. We are kicking off season 2. We've made it back from Vacation Bible School. We've survived the ark.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm
barely
true. Well, we had some help from our friends. I think that's fair to say that. So, yeah. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to our summer episodes, our VBS episodes, as we're calling them, definitely invite you all to go and listen to those. We definitely had a lot of fun. But yeah, we're ready to jump into season 2. Yeah. They really were
definitely fun episodes. I think we haven't laughed that much on podcasts since well, maybe ever. I don't know. But it was super fun to do that. And definitely go listen. And for those of you who maybe have already listened, or so you might have already heard this, but on our August VBS episode, which is when we definitely went, we took the field trip, we went to the Ark, we were not reconverted, but we went with our friends April and Beecher, and April has a book that is coming out in just a couple weeks. So she talked about it a little bit on the August episode. And of course, we are going to have her back in a couple weeks to be talking about it, which I'm so excited because she gave us an advanced copy to read, and it's like amazing.
Yeah.
And so, but if you want to be ready up to speed when that episode drops, please go and pre-order her book wherever you purchase your books. It is available. It's available on audio or Audible. She is the one who read it, and it's called Star Spangled Jesus. And I think that's all you need to know just from the title. Like, it's going to be good. It's her journey out of Christian nationalism after having grown up in it. So please go get that book wherever books are sold. Star Spangled Jesus by April Ajoy.
Yes, definitely check that out. I'm pretty sure I already pre-ordered it. I know I have it like in my shopping cart. I can go back and double check that, but I'm excited about it. I'm definitely going to get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited too. And on that note, kind of let's talk a little bit about season 2, because we have some great authors that are coming on, April being one of them. And we've gotten some other advanced reader copies for other books that we're going to be interviewing the authors on their areas of expertise as it pertains to religious trauma. But I'm excited for this coming season. We have some really interesting things planned. And Andrew, do you want to, why don't you share what the kind of the 2 umbrellas are, to use Bill Gothard terms? What are the umbrellas of topics that we are going to be working under?
Yeah. I had to make a Bill Gothard reference. Yeah, no, but it's great. So we're excited about season 2. There's a couple of things that we're going to be doing, things that we're focusing on that are a little different than what we've done or what we did in season 1. Some of the topics that we're going to be looking at are, for example, medical and financial trauma, and specifically how those show up within the realm of high control religions, within, Christian fundamentalism, evangelicalism, all of that. More specifically, we're going to be touching on topics such as neurodivergence as well, religious scrupulosity, or also known as religious OCD, health and wellness culture. Already touched on the financial trauma piece, but just financial literacy. I mean, anybody who grew up in high control religion, I'm sure for a lot of you, Dave Ramsey was a household name.
Yeah, I was going to say Dave
Financial
Ramsey.
Peace. Is it Financial Peace University? Is that what it was called?
It sure is.
Yeah,
sure.
Anyway.
It still is here in Nashville. Yeah.
We need to make like a little infomercial that, if you went to Financial Peace University, you may be entitled to compensation, but...
seriously. Yeah.
Just all of, and then also how that also relates to things such as prosperity and poverty, and the idea of, if you're poor, it's because you deserve it. You don't work hard enough. And just there's so many layers to this, so much, what's the word? Intersectionality, like, because it's not just religion. A lot of this is interwoven into the fabric of Western culture, but it really shows up in evangelicalism. And so, these are all just an example of some of the topics that we are going to be talking about. That's the one piece. That's the one piece, those topics. The other umbrella to which, Laura is referring is we are excited to also be doing, we call these story episodes. And what we're going to be doing is interviewing different folks from a variety of backgrounds. So many different denominations like the SBC, Seventh-day Adventism, LDS, different mega churches, folks who have come out of these different backgrounds, and really just hearing their lived experience of what it was like.
Yeah.
What it was like growing up or living in those churches, coming out of them. How have they moved on from that? How have they healed? What's worked for them?
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a unique spin on some of these things. I'm really, really excited for that personal element to really deep dive some of these different churches.
Yeah, I am too. I'm so excited as we've been putting this season together because, you think of like medical trauma, financial trauma as it pertains to religious trauma. And it's like, okay, where do we go with this? But as we started talking through like what that could be, I'm just reminded of so many conversations with clients that I've had over the years where different elements of their lives have been exploited or undereducated or where they're just feeling really behind. And I feel like they can fall into these areas of financial and medical trauma. I'm thinking about even my own story, having grown up basically, I mean, I was a camp kid. My dad was a camp director. But we were technically missionaries because we had to raise our own support. And we were very, very poor. But the idea was that because this was God's work, like then God will meet our needs, And so instead of recognizing like, oh, the reason we had, food on our table is because we had a dining hall that, all the camp people went to. Is that God meeting our needs, or is it convenient, that like, we had this because would we, I don't know what we would have been able to afford otherwise. And I've just heard that so much too, like how many of my clients have, just have stories of needs going unmet because, well, God will take care of that, or believing that they're not praying hard enough, or that they're living in sin because they don't have their needs taken care of, or that they don't live in quote unquote abundance because, something's wrong with their faith, or, and I could go on for days about health and wellness culture, and how that's super rampant in high control religion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited. Do you have clients that come in with this stuff as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things where on some level, I feel like a lot of the folks I work with and have worked with, that may not be the primary reason they come to me initially.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, it ends up becoming a thing that we work on that, like, to paraphrase them, they're like, I didn't know this was, like, I knew this was a thing. I didn't know it was this big of a thing. But now that we're like processing it, holy shit, I'm glad we're processing it because I didn't realize how much of a negative impact this had on my life. And I do hear that time and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited. And I'm also excited because in October, we have a mini series. Well, I guess we should say this too. We are moving from dropping 2 episodes a month to dropping an episode every single week, which I'm super excited about. And that's where we can fit in all of these stories and great topics. And what we've decided to do in October is kind of what we're calling a mini series. And it's going to be all about religious trauma and politics, because of course we know we have an election cycle coming up. Super duper fun. Don't worry. We're not telling you, who to vote for or, where you need to stand on issues, but I'm very excited for the list of guests that we're going to be having. For instance, April Ajoy, she's going to be talking about that kind of lived experience inside of Christian nationalism. But we're also talking to other podcasters, authors, professors of religion, people that are in this world doing religious trauma, politics, understanding all of that. We're going to talk a lot about not only the history of religion and politics and how they became kind of bedfellows, but also how fear is used to spread propaganda, Project 2025, white Christian nationalism, biblical masculinity, and how this perpetuates various political ideologies, and so much more. I'm really excited. We've already started recording some of these episodes, and the conversations have been just so good, so rich. And I'm really excited for people to hear them.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about these. And I think I'm glad we decided to do this mini-series. I know we were going back and forth on whether or not we were going to do this and to what extent. And I'm glad we decided to do more than just one episode and really deep dive it a little bit. I'm really excited about our guests. I also, all of this is in light of the election cycle of 4 years ago. And I remember that was when I actually first kind of joined the deconstruction space on social media. Yeah. That's when I first found, I think when you and I first met actually. And
probably.
Yeah. So it's like I really remember what a need there was for just resources. Yeah. And again, not telling folks how they should vote, but really how you can take care of yourself, to really just summarize it. Like that's really what we're wanting to do, is to help folks just take care of yourself and be involved, become involved, but also in a way where you're not, being overwhelmed and all of those things that I know are very pertinent during this time of the year in an election cycle.
Yeah. It's such a balancing act, right? Of like taking care of yourself and also looking for ways that you can show up.
Right.
Whether that's in your community, with your friends, with your family, but realizing, this is overwhelming. There's so much information 24/7. There's news stories dropping all the time. We're expected to be online. And so we also need to care for ourselves and give ourselves moments of lightness and ease, the glimmers, so that we aren't so overwhelmed all the time. Yeah. I'm excited. It's going to be a great season.
Yeah, I am excited about it too. Also, just to let everyone know, there is, the support group that I am running, the one for former and deconstructing Seventh-day Adventists, still time to sign up for that. So if that is something that you are interested in, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to have you be a part of that.
Yeah.
And we're also, the religious trauma and the elections course is still available. And I definitely highly recommend anyone who's interested, please check that out. I think it's a great resource. Use code Sunday School Dropouts for $25 off.
Woohoo. Yes, definitely join that. And so we're going to get into, like we said, we've got medical trauma, we've got financial trauma, we've got our mini series, we've got our story episodes. But one of the reasons we started this podcast was because we didn't want to be another deconstruction or deconversion podcast. And we didn't want to be just a general mental health podcast. We wanted to be a podcast specifically focusing on religious trauma and the unique pieces of that, how to recover, how to resolve, like all those quote unquote fun things. And so we felt it's really important to do every season to do what we're calling touchstone topics, which is laying out the basics. What is religious trauma? What is the nervous system? What are adverse religious experiences? And so I'm excited to bring those back again. And that's where we're going to start today. But this year, instead of just Andrew and I doing, 4 or 5 different episodes as the two of us, we're also going to be bringing in other therapists and coaches and people that are in this field that can speak to those topics as well. So I'm really excited about that. And that's where we're going to start today. But before we get into all of that, I want to just give a little disclaimer, because we know that, sometimes the things that we talk about in these episodes can bring up feelings and emotions and triggers that might require more processing, might be too much to handle. So we just always invite you to please feel free to fast forward or skip through any episode that doesn't feel great to you and come back when you're ready. Our goal is to help you learn to listen to yourself, to know what you need, and go ahead and take that and leave what you don't. But before we get into that, I think we should have a little Flannelgraph story time. All right, class, it is time for Flannelgraph Storytime. And for those of you who don't know what this segment is our way of sharing the things that we are reading or listening to that may have to do with religious trauma, may not. But Andrew, I'm curious to know from you, what's on your Flannelgraph storyboard this week?
Yeah, so I've actually, in the past few weeks, I've gotten back into a book that I read many years ago, but well before I ever deconstructed. And some of you may be familiar with it. It's called The Artist's Way.
Oh,
it's been around,
yeah.
It's been around for a long time.
Okay.
At least 30 years, apparently, because this is the 30th anniversary edition.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay. I have it. I just haven't read it yet.
I used to have a copy, and I, for the life of me, don't know where it is. I probably is still packed up somewhere due to one of my many recent moves in the last 5 years. It's a creativity writing. That's always been something that I've been interested in. And I know I've touched on this in other past episodes, but that's also been, I think for a lot of folks who grew up in a high control religion, that's one of those things that really gets stunted. It's not really encouraged, or at least if it is, it's for the glory of God. It's like, if you can somehow use it to serve Jesus in the church, by all means, go for it. But creativity for its own sake and for, the sake of expressing yourself, like that is not encouraged. And so, I'm still very early on. So we'll see what the experience of going through this book is like now in 2024, 2025. Rather, I think the last time I read it, it was probably like 2007 or 8. And so,
so a long time ago. Very different
I was
place.
still very much in the church. Actually, I hadn't even gotten to my most zealous phase of being involved in the church yet at that time. But
wow,
yeah, and so that would have been like my early college years back then when I first read it. So, but I'm excited.
How interesting that it was that point. So you're reading this very like creative, not woo woo, but like, definitely tapping into a more non-religious side. And that was when you picked it up, even though you're like headed into the most zealous phase of your religious history. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting. It's been so many years ago. Well, it's like, I do a lot of parts work, as anyone who knows me knows. So I definitely can look back and recognize like there were just different parts. Like there was part of me that was trying to find meaning in this religion and doing what was expected of me, and kind of taking this approach of, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to like do it all in, be on fire for it. Meaning like, on fire for God, the Adventist message and all of those things.
Yeah.
But also that creative side of me that just like absolutely lived for like writing and creating and all of that. Like those were an example of two very polarized parts. Did not get along, did not coexist peacefully. And each time one would do something, it would be like an equal and opposite reaction from the other. And I think that was kind of part of that. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. All right. Maybe I'll have to start it. Of course, I hear people talk all the time about morning pages, and I think that sounds like such a fabulous idea. And I'm very curious to hear how it goes with you. Might inspire me to actually pull the book off of my shelf and read it.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep you updated.
Yeah, I love
it. What about you, Laura? Anything you've been reading or listening to lately?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in researcher mode at the present moment, kind of going down. I feel like, I think this is like a neurodivergent thing where it's like, you get focused on, I'm kind of dealing with this in my personal life, so I'll go down it in a professional realm, or sometimes my professional realm inspires like the personal, kind of journey or whatever. So I feel like I'm kind of going through that in a variety of different topics. So I'm in researcher mode right now, but I've actually been reading a lot of books and information on the mother and father wounds, which is really just kind of fleshing out the idea of like how our families of origin, specifically our mothers and fathers, how they impacted us. Because I've been reflecting a lot with clients, seeing a lot online about the damage of programs like Focus on the Family, this James Dobson, this Strong-Willed Child. And I kind of came to this realization the other day, like, how many of us have parents who were kind of brought into these high control religions. Like maybe they were born into it. Maybe that kind of came into it through like, what is like the Jesus rallies and Youth for Christ and like kind of all these things that were coming up in the boomer eras, right? So like in the 60s and 70s, and they're kind of being now like sold out for Christ. But many of them coming out of homes of high trauma, high abuse, high conflict, parents that were not, necessarily showing them love and the impact that it had on them. But rather than dealing with it, they took on the, messages of Billy Graham and other people of like, well, just love God and everything will be okay. And then they married each other and then they started procreating, and then they've got Bill Gothard, who's, coming out at the same time with here's all these rules and all these things and just do these things and you'll raise good, godly children. And I just feel like there's so many millennials and Gen Xers that are the products of parents who, instead of dealing with the abuse and neglect and trauma that they endured, bypassed it with all these spiritual things and then not only perpetuated that onto their children, but also then put the God layer on top of it of like, but this is God's way. And now all of those children are in therapy and coaching, and the ones coming out of, high control religions and seeking to do it differently. And it's been this fascinating road that I've kind of gone down. And I'm thinking of like a million different books, but like, yeah, it's just kind of this, that's where my weird mind goes to. And that's what I've been reading a lot of as of late.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I saw, and you saying all that made me think, I saw a meme the other day pulling from Bill Gothard's like umbrella model. And it was, cause that was in my Bible textbooks and that was in an Adventist academy. But, and the meme was, like a picture of the umbrella model. And it was like, if you recognize this, you're in therapy now. I don't make the rules.
Yeah. It's so true. It is so true. Yeah. Yeah. So I just, between him and then, James Dobson with Focus on the Family and his strong-willed child stuff, which is just fascinatingly devastating to read and to dig into, because I think so many of us now are realizing like, oh, the goal was to break my will to be controlled, to, shut down my personality. I mean, like you're talking about with like the creativity piece, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're bringing that back in. It's like this whole part of you that wasn't able to be like leaned into and nurtured for so many years, because that doesn't fit with a controllable person. An artist by nature is beyond the boxes, and how many of us had to really fragment ourselves down in order to be palatable in these systems and ultimately much easier to control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny. Like I've heard the people, like I was in the church talking about like something to the effect of like, if you don't start young, they leave the church. And it's like, yes, actually they say that as like this warning, and yet they're really telling on themselves too. It's like, if we don't literally indoctrinate our children, the whole house of cards falls apart.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really, but anyway,
should it's very be alarming.
Really I know.
That should be alarming.
Kind of like, oh, well, that's a red flag.
Yeah, it is majorly. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I could go on and on for that, and, maybe actually we need, I can think of a couple of people that are doing a lot of research into Focus on the Family, strong-willed child. And, maybe we'll need to do an episode on that or something,
Focus on the Family specifically, or just that whole movement? Okay. I mean, I will say that's another thing I hear various folks I work with, clients, like mention specifically, Focus on the Family.
Yes. Yeah.
So
because like Bill Gothard, I mean, I don't know that they overtly partnered together, but it's such an incestuous world. And so like they absolutely were kind of going back and forth off of each other. And there's so many people like IBLP and Bill Gothard that were learning these parenting techniques, even though they might not have formally been in that religion or in that church. People, when they start hearing the different like tenets of Strong-Willed Child, James Dobson, Bill Gothard. They're like, oh, that was like, yeah, in my home too, or in my church, even though we didn't promote their conferences or, whatnot. So it's wild. It goes deep.
It does.
That is for sure.
It does. Well, even Adventism, like a very insulated sort of community, but at the same time, like the umbrella model was there. Like we had a lot of it too. It was everywhere. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that I still know the address to Focus on the Family in Colorado Springs and their zip code 80995, because I listened to Adventures in Odyssey, which is the product of them, so long. I'm like, I'm a 42-year-old woman. Like, that stuff is ingrained, Yeah.
So. Oh my God. Adventures in Odyssey. That's another one.
Yeah, and they're still making them. That's the thing.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but I didn't know that.
Nieces and nephews who are listening to Adventures in Odyssey. Yeah, new ones, new episodes, infused with Christian nationalism.
Of course. Of course.
Maybe that's another Flannelgraph Storytime for another time. Is Adventures in Odyssey.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good one. Yeah, we should do that.
I love it. All right. Well, thanks for sharing, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
All right, everybody. It is my favorite segment as we lift some people up in prayer. We're also going to be lifting up Andrew in prayer because he's not able to be a part of this prayer circle right now, but he'll be back, don't worry, for the rest of this episode. But before we get into the rest of the episode, I think that we need to lift up this story coming out of Aurora, Colorado. I don't know if y'all have seen this. I don't know if I would recommend actually going and doing some research on this. Of course, do what you want. But it's kind of a weird, gruesome story that is just extremely, extremely disturbing. So for those of you who haven't heard the story coming out of Aurora, Colorado, there is a former cop who was convicted of raping his daughters as well as sexually assaulting her and two of his adopted daughters. In addition to this, he's been accused of trying to drown one of his sons, and he also has two other sons, aged 10 and 13, who were recently court-ordered to participate in what's called reunification therapy with their father, which I'll get to the reunification therapy in a moment, given that I've had extensive work with victims and perpetrators in a therapeutic context. I've worked with both. But essentially what happened is that the two boys began seeing a Christian counselor who is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. So that part is good. But not shockingly, the boys' mother, who's the ex-wife now of this cop, objected to the boys participating in this therapy, to becoming reunified with their father, given all of the charges that he has against them. And because this was court-ordered therapy and she was refusing to let the boys go to it, she actually ended up in jail because she broke the court order. Of course, there was a huge outcry because of this, and rightfully so. And so she ended up not having to fulfill her entire sentence in jail. But she's also accused the therapist of engaging in psychological abuse and siding with the father in order for the father to gain custody of these two boys. They're 10 and 13. And it's just a wild story because there's so many layers to it, and it's so connected to high control religion. Like, this is a therapist who, yes, is licensed, and is probably qualified to do court mandated therapy. But we see here like how that can get so mixed up with somebody's religion. So personally, I believe that reunification therapy is questionable at best. My first job as a therapist was working with convicted adult and juvenile sex offenders. And on top of that, I have worked with survivors of various types of abuse and violence for over a decade. So I'm very well aware of what reunification looks like from a therapeutic angle, and even participated in a lot of reunification therapy when I worked with convicted adult and juvenile sex offenders. But one of the biggest things, like the absolute foundational piece of that therapy, is that it is victim led. It's the victim that directs if they want that to happen or not. And that's what I think is so wild about this, is that the reunification part is what is court ordered, which so much research has come out and said this is not helpful. This actually ends up harming the victim more. It takes away their voice. It puts them in potential lines of danger, rather than it being victim led. So maybe the victim does a lot of therapy as well as the perpetrator of this abuse. And then the victim decides, I want to start the reunification process, and it's going to look like this, and the pace it's going to go like is this. So when I participated in reunification therapy, it was always client directed, and it was at the pace that the client wanted to go, client meaning the victim of the abuse. And so if the victim doesn't feel safe, maybe even ever, then we don't encourage them to reunify, period, full stop, end of sentence. But it's just so wild that in this case, the reunification piece is court ordered, and the therapist of these boys is the one pushing it, even though the boys themselves aren't the ones who are asking for it. So like I said, this type of therapy has been under criticism for quite some time, mainly because many perpetrators of violence have used this as a way to get back in control of their victims for further abuse. And ultimately, it centers the perpetrator of the abuse. And as I talk about this, even, it to me is so reflective of what happens inside of churches of high control religion. Like when the entire goal, if somebody is harmed, whether it's a little bit or all the way up to overt abuse, the entire goal is to like rush towards forgiveness. And in order for everybody except the victim to feel a sense of comfort and relief and kind of able to bypass what actually happened, it literally centers the perpetrator of it and essentially tells the victim, like, we don't really care how you feel, because what's more important is that you become reunified with this victim, even if it means that they perpetrate again. We don't care so much as forgiveness is what is on the docket. And it's just wild to me. It's a story that's continuing to evolve. Luckily, because the community has not only stepped in with their voices, but they've stepped in with their dollars. The mother is able to take additional legal action. And I think reunification therapy is being brought back up to the forefront of legislation. I think, gosh, it was within the last, 5 to 10 years that this was really recognized to be ineffective in centering the perpetrators. But there are still states that have these laws that allow for court-ordered reunification. And I just think it's so incredibly harmful. And like I said, really mimics the dynamics inside of high control religion and the focus on forgiveness and Jesus saving and, focusing on that over the safety of somebody who has been harmed, who has been abused, or who could very easily be in harm's way if they are back in contact with that perpetrator. So that's fun. Definitely lifting them up in prayer. And the other thing that I am lifting up in prayer is The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It is a show on Hulu, and I kind of recommend it. For those of you who watch Bravo and maybe even the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which I admit I do watch, you'll know that it is dramatic. Like, the show is dramatic, both Real Housewives of Salt Lake City as well as Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It is very dramatic, but whereas Real Housewives of Salt Lake City has tons of drama that is far outside of the Mormon church, this show is very much centering around people's Mormon faith and their identity in it. So that's kind of a big content warning for people to know going into it, that it is very much centered. It is spoken about in a very positive way. There, of course, they are, talking about some of what they would call the flaws of it, and they're trying to, quote unquote, rebrand the Mormon faith into a more progressive faith. That's very much obvious throughout the show. But, we do see up front some of the rules within the Mormon faith, how they're trying to, kind of rebrand to the term LDS, Latter-day Saints, in an effort to distance themselves from some of the cultural misconceptions as well as the practices that used to happen in the past. But in my opinion, the rebrand is only kind of shining up the same high control tactics. And of course, if you've watched it, you know probably exactly who I'm talking about, because one of the most poignant cases of this kind of buffed up version of what is really a high control religion is with the character Jen, who is considered to be the most religious in that group, meaning she's the most devout. She wears the undergarments. She follows the rules. She does the baby blessing. She upholds the priesthood, which is the male head of household. And she has this husband, and they allow the cameras to see what I would consider extreme dynamics of power and control. And my thought is, if that is what we are seeing on screen, then behind the scenes, it is even worse. And it is shocking to me that they let this be aired. And now all the women are talking about it on podcasts, and they are not shying away from saying what we saw was absolutely accurate. There was no editing or setup done for that, and it was actually worse than what we saw, which I'm not shocked about at all, right? If something makes it on screen or in public, it's always amplified behind the scenes. And of course, we know that high control religion grooms people towards abuse and being further controlled, especially for women in relationships. The research is even there. Research talks about how women who are in domestically violent relationships and also fundamentalist religions are far less likely than their non-religious counterparts to stay in the relationship because of reasons like Bible, God, pastors, religious texts, religious practices. And so they say, I just have to love this person more. I just have to pray for them more. I just have to respect them more. And we see all of these excuses coming out as she is being treated by her husband with extremely controlling behavior. And then she justifies it, by saying, oh, he feels a loss of control because I'm the breadwinner. She uses, religious reasoning. She uses a lot of abuse rhetoric of, who's to say if I were to divorce him, I wouldn't find somebody else who's the same way, which I think calls into question how easy it is for us to conflate love and abuse as the same thing. And I see this happen so often within high control religions where love and abuse are overcoupled. They are the same thing. It's this belief that love hurts. It is painful. And I have to accept these painful parts of it. I just find it to be deeply concerning that, not only is she conflating this abuse and control with love, but it is extremely normalized on the show. And her friends do point it out, but even then, there's only a few of them that seem to truly understand what's happening here and really pushing for her to do something. And as we know from the end of the show, as well as the interviews that are after, of course, they are still in a relationship, and he has further isolated her because of his medical school. So she's not even living in Salt Lake City as we are talking now. And she's more isolated while he's doing medical school, which means that the likelihood that the abuse and control is happening on even a greater extent is quite likely. So overall, I would say it is a difficult show to watch because of that. And I think it's extremely easy to see how this new quote unquote brand of Mormonism is just repackaged patriarchy. So they need our thoughts and prayers.
I'm really excited to be revisiting some of these touchstone topics. I, first of all, can't believe it's been a year since season 1 where we were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
But here we are. And back to a really, really important question. And that is simply, what is religious trauma and how do we define it?
Yeah. Good place to start, right? Yeah. I feel like that's the question I'm asked a lot, the most actually, because most people, like when they hear that I work with religious trauma, they're like, oh, so you work with people that have been sexually abused by members of the clergy. And I'm like, well, sometimes, yes, but like it's so much more than that. And it's such a more complex question. And so like my little quippy answer for that, when somebody asks me, what is religious trauma? I just say religious trauma is trauma. It is the definition that I use of trauma is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon, or is happening for too long that overwhelms our ability to cope and come back to a place of safety. And so religious trauma then is all of that, but happening in a religious context, whether it's because of the beliefs or the doctrines or the relationships or practices that are overwhelming your ability to cope and come back to a place of safety. So yeah, that's like how I generally define it. What do you say to that question when people ask you?
Yeah. Honestly, I say just about the same thing. I'm very clear that religious trauma is trauma. It's not and trauma. It's about your body's physiological response to things that are distressing and overwhelming. And so, therefore, religious trauma is as much trauma as any other kind. It's about your body's physiological response. Like what's happening internally. It's interesting. I always get, there's 2 different responses I seem to get when I tell people that this is what I do professionally. On the one hand, I have folks who are incredulous, like, especially in the Bible Belt. But, they're like, is religion harmful? Like sarcastically almost. I sometimes will get that. And the other response I get though is, sort of this response of like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad people are talking about it head on now. The response of it resonates. And they're like, oh my gosh, people do that professionally now. Like, thank God. I wish I'd known that. Or I wish that was happening 10, 20 years ago. Thankfully the latter response is actually the more common one that I get.
I've gotten both of those responses a lot too. I mean, the eye roll for sure. But I think, I think there's such a cultural conversation. Obviously both of us have academic backgrounds in mental health fields. And so I guess I can't speak for you, but I'm assuming that you, as well as I, was exposed to a lot of, research that really talked about religion only in a positive light, in terms of it is only a pro-social factor. It is only a supportive thing in someone's life. And I'm not here to say that it couldn't be. But we weren't as therapists in psychology courses, we're not given this expansive view of like, religion can be a pro-social and helpful supportive factor in somebody's life, but it also can be a risk factor. It can also be a source of harm. And I think that's where, so many people, a client might enter their office and they're like, I have no idea how to work with somebody who is saying that they have religious trauma because we were taught that this is a good thing. And then we compound that with everything that happens culturally, even thinking about this cultural moment that religion is upheld as this, kind of untouchable, on this untouchable pedestal. And really, obviously, because of the clients we work with and the research we do, that is just not the case. Like, religion, sure, can be a pro-social factor for some, but for others, it's a very harmful thing and does result in trauma.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that really sets religious trauma apart from other types of trauma. Like in this whole conversation, like it is trauma firstly to go back to the point number 1, but there is the one thing that does kind of set it apart as far as just how we see it, how we recognize it, or rather how we don't recognize it, is that so oftentimes it's not recognized as trauma because church is not recognized as having the potential to cause that much harm. Or if it is, it's looked at through a lens of like one bad apple. Like, well, yeah, that priest obviously was problematic and, had the hierarchy of the church done their due diligence in holding him accountable. It wouldn't have happened. It shouldn't happen, but that was a one-off. Like, there's nothing systemically problematic about the hierarchy of the church, of the institution of the church. And so a lot of times it kind of flies under the radar where it's like people, even clinicians out there in the world, they're like, you go to them and it's religious trauma. And they're like, what? But you've been out of the church for 10 years. How? Okay.
Right. Yeah. Which I think leads to a conversation too of like, is religious trauma different than other kinds of trauma? And I would say on a base level, in terms of how trauma lives in your body, no, it's not different. But in terms of like some of the recovery pieces, yes. So what, I mean, maybe what is a good way to explain it is, obviously we both work at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. Like there's intentional words there because it's kind of this two-part process. When we talk about trauma resolution, we're talking about the way that trauma lives in your body in a physiological sense. So how our bodies are physiologically responding to things that are too much, too fast, too soon, or happening for too long. And generally speaking, from body to body, it's pretty much the same regardless of the inspiring event or events. And so when we look at how does trauma physiologically live in somebody's body who's experienced trauma from war versus sexualized violence versus religious trauma versus a natural disaster, internally, we're looking at the same thing. We're looking at, the different mechanisms of our body, how they're responding, how they're not being able to kind of turn off, find a sense of safety, come back to a place of stability. And that piece is often the same. Now, how it kind of manifests in people's lives, of course, can be different. For some people that results in things like extreme hypervigilance or chronic dis-ease or, depression, anxiety, OCD, like a variety of things. But in terms of how it lives physiologically in our body, that's the same from origin to origin, right? Religious trauma, whatever. When we look at the recovery process, then that's where I really differentiate religious trauma as something different than trauma from war, trauma from childhood, things like that, because the recovery process is looking at what are the specific things that are unique to that environment or that type of trauma that maybe aren't to other traumatic events. And what I mean by that is if I'm working with somebody who has trauma from like a car accident or something, we might resolve the trauma in their body and then they're like, but it still is really difficult to drive down the road. Or I still feel really scared to get into my car. Or I'm not able to let other people drive. Whereas somebody with religious trauma might go, that I don't struggle with that, right? But I can't walk into Hobby Lobby. Or I hear certain, Christmas songs or, whatever it might be. That's where I get really triggered. But not necessarily the car thing and vice versa. So I really like to differentiate between resolution, like how we actually resolve that traumatic energy in our body is very much the same from person to person, regardless of where the trauma resulted from. But the recovery process is the more unique piece, which is what I think what makes our company different, because we have so many people who just understand the ins and outs of high control religion and fundamentalism and what that does to a person in terms of how they live and function in the world.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It's such a unique experience, like recovering from religious trauma, and it's like, it can't tell you how many times I've heard folks tell me that it's like they've gone to other therapists, for example, and great therapists. Yeah. I'm not knocking other therapists, but rather just this disconnect of, it's not that you have to live it, but also if you've never lived it or at least aren't extensively trained in it, like there is just such a disconnect where, like, to that piece than what you were saying, it's like they know how to maybe help you heal from trauma, generally speaking, but the nuance of what it's like to grow up in evangelicalism within purity culture, to so things like that, to like not to be, be homeschooled. There's certain experiences that like you just if you don't know, you just don't know, and it's hard to explain it to somebody who does not know.
Yeah, I remember a time, this is before I was like really overtly advertising myself as somebody who specialized in this area, but I've been a licensure supervisor for 10 plus years at this point, which means I oversee people as they are getting their therapeutic license. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. And I remember when I started having supervisees come into my office, try just like with a big, it's like they had a big question mark over their head because they're reporting and talking about these clients that they're working with that are demonstrating all of the signs of sexualized violence, sexual assault, the kind of what we might call like the typical results based off of research, tons and tons of research. Actually, sexual assault, sexual violence has the most research around it in like the trauma field than anything else. And so they're looking at the research and they're going, my client is demonstrating all of these symptoms, but they just swear up and down that they have never been sexually abused or sexually assaulted. And they'd say, in fact, many of them didn't even have sex until they were married. And I knew as a clinician then, I was like, tell me a little bit about their religious background. They're like, what? And basically, what we know now is that purity culture often has the same exact symptoms that are produced in our body as victims of sexualized violence. And it was like this aha moment for so many people going, oh, so we actually have to work through the purity culture piece. There is no like physical sexual assault that happened, but the sexualized abuse is what happened, and there's so many clinicians, therapists, coaches even that just don't know that. So that's my long way of saying, like, I agree to have, you can go to anybody, I think, to help with that trauma resolution part, anybody who's trained.
Right.
But the recovery piece, is so unique. And that's, I think why that's one of my hopes, one of my visions for the company is that it's like a one-stop shop. Like we can help you with the trauma resolution piece and the recovery piece because we know it and we get it. But I think that's where a lot of people can get confused.
Another question that kind of comes to mind, kind of right in the coattails of all of this too, and about also kind of made me think of it when folks are asking me like, oh, so religion is harmful? Like when I tell them that I work with religious trauma.
Yeah.
That does beg a question though. Like, is religion inherently harmful? Does religion always result in trauma?
God.
Like that's a question I hear a lot as well. Like, does it always result in religious trauma?
Yeah. My answer to that is no, it doesn't. But that idea of like, is religion harmful? Like inherently, I also like want to say no. But then but then we have to look at like, well, what is religion? What are the tenets of religion? That's like a whole philosophical question that we could have. But I think like clinically speaking, I would say no to both of those questions. Religion is not inherently harmful. It does not always result in trauma or other disease, physical or mental health disease or disorder. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's inherently harmful, or do I think that it always results in trauma? The short answer is no. Now, that being said, it's like the way that, at least, and of course, every church, every religion arguably is maybe a little different from the next. The things that I have seen consistently that make, at least in this case, high control religion in the American experience of it, so evangelicalism and similar types of church bodies, I don't think it's inherently harmful, but I do think that the way that it's structured with hierarchies, the way that we're conditioned to not trust ourselves, the way that there's not real accountability, not for leadership anyway, I think that it is inherently vulnerable to
I think that's
hereditary people, abusive behavior, So in that regard, yes, but does that mean that everybody who grows up or experiences that system is going to be a victim of that, a survivor of that? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I do see the way that the structure is set up as being inherently problematic. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I see it as.
Oh, yeah. No, I think you bring up a really good question, because anytime that we talk about any system or institution or group that is set up in the hierarchical way, there's always vulnerability to do that. You know, I know for me, like as an owner of this company, I am constantly aware of like, how do I make sure that I'm not replicating dynamics of power and control? Because at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, there has to be somebody who's like making decisions and paying the bills and like hiring people like that. Like I get that, right? It's like the business doesn't just crystallize on its own. But I am so keenly aware of like, I do not ever want to create this hierarchy of, you know, power imbalance between me and anybody else who's working with me. But I also know I'm super sensitive to that. So I'm like, it's like always at the front of my mind. But I think to that end, like, I'm sure that there very much are people that start a group. I mean, I think of L. Ron Hubbard with Scientology, like his goal in starting that was to become powerful and rich. Like, I mean, it's documented. He's like, yeah, you know, how do you make a ton of money and like have control over people? Like you start a religion, which he did with Scientology. I would venture to say, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, I don't think most people that start groups and institutions or are like become pastors or clergy members set out with this, like, I'm going to gain power and control over people. This is my intention of doing that. But it happens because the nature of the system always lends to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. To that end, I mean, I'll even say and go on the record as saying, like, I would think that the majority of people who are involved in religions, including leadership, for the most part, I think went into it with good intentions. I do really believe that. That doesn't take away 1 ounce of the amount of harm that has happened.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I don't think that most of these folks are inherently bad or, you know, I don't think they're bad people. I think that unfortunately just the nature of the system, hierarchies, lack of accountability, lack of, you know, when you're told that, and especially in like a religious context, when you're told that you yourself, you can't be trusted, like the locus of control is not internal, it's this external power structure, like whatever the context is, that's always, I think, going to be problematic and set itself up for things like harm and abuse to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't know if that answered your question, because I'm trying to remember what the original question was.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But I think it kind of leads us back to, I think, what the original question was like, is it always going to lead to trauma? Is it always going to lead to harm? Is it always going to lead to other mental health disorder, disease? And both of us are saying no. And I think that's important too, then to recognize that like the subjectivity of trauma is huge. So what is traumatic for you may or may not be for me. What overwhelms my system is going to be different than what overwhelms your system. And then the impact of that, you know, it may not always result in trauma. It could result in a variety of other physical and mental health disorders and disease. But I think that goes to explain too why, like, I think so many of us, and I can think of clients who are just very confused as like, why did it impact me this way, but not my sibling, not my friends or anything like that? And I think that goes to the subjectivity of trauma and a variety of other factors. But I'm curious to know like what your thoughts are with that.
Well, it's what you just said, the subjectivity of trauma. And one example that I always bring back is, or bring up, a really bad car accident. And it was a couple that they both survived. They're both okay. They're good. But it was a situation where, you know, really bad car accident on the interstate, and one of them was trapped in the vehicle for like 45 minutes before fire was able to get them out with the jaws of life. And the one that was trapped developed symptoms consistent with like PTSD. The other one didn't. Now, for the most part, they went through the same experience. They were both in the car accident. I mean, all of that to say, I mean, and I could get into the nuance of like why maybe one of them developed those types of symptoms and the other didn't, and we can do that later. But point is, it's like there is a lot of not variety, but like it's unique to each person. The way you show up, the resources that you have. This is a big one. The resources you have and the ability to exercise your own autonomy in the midst of things that are distressing and overwhelming, that plays a huge role in it. So that's an obvious example there where one person was able to get out of the car. They exercised their autonomy. They were able to get out. The other person certainly tried to get out, but they weren't able to. And so there is something that makes sense why way trauma showed up for them was different. And that's an obvious physical example, but I think in the case of religious trauma, it's the same idea though. It's the same principle. It just, the nuance of specific circumstances can be different. And so, yeah, you can have siblings who grew up in the same family, went to the same church, went to the same church school, and are now adults. And it's like, did we even remotely grow up in the same world? Because I'm over here in therapy for all of these things, and you're out there acting like, I guess, living your best life like it was nothing. I don't get it. I hear that a lot. Yeah. That's a common experience.
Yeah. I don't have research to back this up, but I have found so many times that the people that are in my office experiencing the most amount of symptoms were definitely the people that were the most committed in those groups and religions and churches. They were giving their time, energy, resources, their entire life. Everything was wrapped up into that church, and really trying to carry out the mission of whatever that church or religion was. And that level of commitment and indoctrination and embodiment of those messages and the way to live and practice, I think, is what then unfortunately sets them up outside of that to then their body having these really awful responses. But yeah, to your point, I mean, how trauma lives in the body is so subjective, and there's so many different factors, everything from like DNA, like genetics, to history, to access to safety and coping mechanisms. Yeah, I mean, that all determines like what the result out of that will be. So I definitely understand that and get that. Yeah.
I'm curious too what your thoughts are on so in the healing of religious trauma and recognizing harm that high control systems can cause. Does that mean to really heal from religious trauma? Does one have to leave the church? Do you have to leave? Do you have to deconvert? I know I'm asking a lot of questions in one, but is atheism the inevitable conclusion of this trajectory?
I think that's such a good question, because oftentimes that is a huge fear of people. They go, if I go through this process of resolving and recovering from religious trauma, does it mean I won't have my faith anymore? And I think they're asking that question for good reason, because really up until the last 5, 6, 7 years, the loudest voices in the quote unquote religious trauma field, like psychologically speaking, were saying that atheism was the cure for religious trauma. Like, just leave it all behind, reject that, and call religion dumb or silly or harmful, and you'll be fine. And I actually vehemently disagree with that. I think that there's a lot of people who come out of high control religions and atheism is the path for them. But I don't think that that's the path for everybody. And I think to suggest that is just as fundamentalist as many of the religions that we're coming out of. But I do think that oftentimes in this process, your faith might shift, your spiritual, inclinations or, kind of what you're looking for in a church might shift, your view of God might shift. And does that mean that you stay in the church? Maybe. Does it mean that you go somewhere different? Maybe. Does it mean that you leave altogether? Maybe. Like, all of those are possibilities, but none of them are, I don't think, absolute. Like, you have to do, like, it has to result in this one thing. And if you're working with a therapist or coach that suggests that, I actually would see that as like a pretty big red flag. Like, oh, we're going to get you to the point where you can leave this church or leave this faith or deconvert altogether, I would be very skeptical of anybody who has a path requiring that.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's a prescriptive, this is where you need to end up. Like you said, it's still fundamentalism, like to vehemently say, well, this is what you should be. This is what you ought to be.
Yeah.
The thing with atheism is often, not always, because I mean, if that's the path you're on and that's where you need to be right now, that's valid. That's fair. There's also folks who still find meaning in the Christian tradition in some capacity, even after they've deconstructed, have healed, are continuing to heal and recover. And that's also valid. And also there's countless other ways that you can live your life. And so, I definitely have seen examples where, folks have maybe deconverted Christianity, have gone into atheism, and are now very vocally outspoken, staunch atheists. And it's kind of like, at least from the perspective of fundamentalism or black and white thinking, it's like, okay, you've not actually changed. You've just changed. You've changed brands. Okay. So,
it's that idea of like the embodied fundamentalism. When we come out of these systems, and there's so much that we have been exposed to for years and usually even decades, it lives inside of us. And unless we look at resolving that piece, like how that lives inside of us, we do tend to just like, quote unquote, fundamentalist hop from one thing or group or activity to the next, looking for the key to living, the steps that I have to follow or the rules that I have to follow to be in this group or to have the best life or the new pathway to God or whatever it might be. If we do not learn how to resolve how fundamentalism lives inside our bodies, I do think we just recreate that just with a different message. We're just proselytizing for a different end goal, but we're still proselytizing and we're still living as if like, if I don't follow these tenets, something bad will happen. Or I'm not living the right way. I definitely did that. Like I went from right into wellness culture. Like thinking I have to do all the cleanses and the, correct eating and the gut health and the supplements and whatever, and spend tens of thousands of dollars. And just became a follower of wellness culture instead of a follower of a religious deity.
Without getting into that like a whole other tangent, but it is so interesting seeing just the parallels of how like you can go to other things but still be showing up kind of the same way that you were, and fundamentalist high control systems. So in summary, is the goal of healing religious trauma to leave religion behind? It's like we're in agreement. Like, no, that's not. No. It's not.
Yeah.
If that's what it looks like for you, great. Like that's valid. That's fair. But that is not the inevitable path that you have to take just because you are healing from religious trauma.
Right. Right.
Another question. I'll preface this with, I know you and I both know that the definition of trauma in the sense of like a diagnosis, like PTSD. There's so much controversy and debate in the community around that because for all the reasons. But is religious trauma, is it the same as PTSD or complex PTSD? Is that fair to say? How would you articulate that?
Yeah, when people ask me that question, I usually do, I put religious trauma under the Bill Gothard umbrella. The umbrella of complex trauma, mostly. There's a lot of people who grew up in high control religions that would say, I can't name like one specific thing that happened and then everything changed. This was just ongoing, persistent, overwhelming, inescapable. These little things that were happening. This was just how I lived, essentially. So when we look at PTSD versus CPTSD, I like to, some people call it big T trauma, little T trauma. That to me feels like very comparative. I don't like that because it's like, oh, well, my big T trauma is like so much worse than your little T trauma. And it's like, okay, that's not helpful. But what I do call it is like single incident trauma versus complex trauma. And when we think about single incident trauma, which most closely aligns with PTSD, we're thinking about like a specific incident. You talked about the car accident. There's this thing that happened. So there was a before and then the thing happened and then there's an after. Right. And And we work around that specific incident in resolving how the trauma is living in your body from that specific incident. Whereas complex trauma, there isn't always one specific big event that you go, it was there, that moment, that was my life then changed. It's this series of things that are happening persistently and consistently over time that are overwhelming to your nervous system and that are often inescapable. You can't run anywhere. You can't go for help. Like, this is just how it is. I think it's important to recognize you can have single incidents and complex trauma. Like, you can have the complex trauma and then also say, but there were these specific incidences that happened over time, or multiple times that I can look back and they're big and scary and overwhelming. But I tend to put religious trauma under the umbrella of complex trauma simply because for most of us, it was so ongoing and consistent and persistent and inescapable. And that sometimes can help people then, Google is not always the greatest, but you can Google, like, what are symptoms of complex PTSD? And they oftentimes find themselves in there. They're like, oh, check. This gives me a framework for what I'm dealing with.
Yeah. I would agree. As far as, again, just anecdotal evidence, I suppose, but from what I've seen most commonly is that folks who suffer or are struggling with religious trauma, complex trauma, like it's a lot of stuff that's happened over a long period of time as opposed to single incident. And I also like that. I like that distinction because I definitely, even in grad school, and I didn't go to grad school that long ago, big T trauma, little T trauma was in common usage. Yeah. Like, now they would always kind of give the little asterisk of like, well, there's probably a better way to say it now, but for communication purposes, like, we know what this means, so we still say it. And I'm like, okay, that still seems problematic, but it's still very much in common usage. And PTSD definitely is like that singular incident, and which doesn't usually capture what religious trauma is. It's usually not a singular incident.
And I know we're going to be talking in another episode more specifically about religious trauma in the nervous system,
right?
Which of course plays into this conversation. But I think what's important for people to realize is just because an overwhelming thing happened, that does not necessarily mean it will result in trauma.
Right.
So when we look at the diagnosis of PTSD or CPTSD, we're looking at this thing happened, whether it was the single incident or we're talking complex over time, and there was no resolution. So that energy, that trauma energy that's stored in the body is still living and active. And over time, if we do not have a way to essentially discharge that energy, resolve how that's living in our body, that's where it starts to turn into PTSD or CPTSD or many other different mental and physical health disorders and diseases. When we look at complex trauma in particular, with this constant overwhelm and your nervous system is always on, we see that for people in those situations, it often results in autoimmune disorders or gastrointestinal issues, like things that are longer term issues because your body, your physiology has had to be shaped and shifted as the result of your environment. And so over time, then we see the physical and emotional, psychological, long-term effects, which I think is important, because obviously we work with trauma, but then we also see a lot of these other things as well. What are some of the things that you kind of see in your office, coming through symptoms wise? Maybe trauma, but maybe also other things.
Yeah. Well, in addition to the classic stuff that we associate with trauma, like what you said, a lot of autoimmune type stuff, but a lot of GI stuff, gastrointestinal issues. And it is so interesting because I know this has been around for a little while now, but for those who are familiar with like the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences, like with trauma and everything, I know there's a book. I mean, I'm sure there's more than one book now, but the one I can think of offhand is The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And it's really just dissecting all of that and just, when a lot of distressing, overwhelming things happen, especially in those formative years of your life. And you're not able to like effectively process that energy out through, your body, and it's there and it stays there. Like the long-term health outcomes it has across the adult lifespan is remarkable. And I mean, I just remember autoimmune and GI, two of the most common ways that shows up, and that tracks. That, I mean, from just a personal, like I said, those are the two that I see the most. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. That's my own life as well. Yeah. I mean, I have had chronic GI issues ever since I moved to Nashville, actually, which for me represents a time of getting to a place of safety. I had moved out of the community that I was born and raised in, and the church that I was, raised in, and all of that. And it seems so silly or weird or counterintuitive of like, oh, you got to a place of safety and then all these issues showed up. And that is, unfortunately, it feels wildly unfair. But like, a lot of times while we're in those systems, those symptoms don't have space to show up because we're in survival mode. And it's not until we get out of that and our bodies go, oh my goodness, I am safe, that it's like they kind of like relax a bit and everything that's been being held in starts to come out. And that's where we see everything from like autoimmune disorders to GI issues. And we see, psychological stuff too: depression, anxiety, OCD, social phobias, relational issues, struggles in communication and boundaries. Just so much that's related to being in those systems and high control groups and religions. And that's where it can be really confusing, because you're like I said, oh my gosh, I'm free. And then, oh no, my life just fell apart. Like everything that I thought was real and true, and my body's rebelling against me and my life is rebelling against me, and I don't know what to do. And then they end up hopefully working with a trained practitioner.
I always use the metaphor through a parts work lens with that actually makes a lot of sense. It's not evidence that you made a mistake, and it's not evidence that you are regressing or not healing or whatever. But it's like you said, it's like, I mean, there were parts of you that were like maybe like white knuckle and just like holding on for dear life, keeping everything where it needed to be able to survive and exist in that system. And now you're finally out of it. And those parts of you realize that, and now they can like let go, like thank God, let go. But then on the other hand, now whatever it is they were holding under wraps now hits the fan, and it can feel messy. But that's not evidence that you made a mistake. It's not evidence that you're somehow broken. Not at all.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah. When you said that, it reminded me, I know we talked about a car accident earlier, but there was a really bad car accident that I witnessed about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was the type of car accident that had just one thing different, or, like if somebody would have swerved just a little bit or that, like, I don't know that I would be here today. And it was one of those and I could see we were in stopped traffic, like on the highway or whatever. And so I could see what was coming through my rear view mirror, and I knew what was about to happen. And I braced, right? Like our bodies brace, right? For impact, right? To make sure that we're going to be safe. So our body does this thing of bracing. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see like my body is kind of like everything is going in and up as my body is bracing. And that's our natural, like if our body is sensing danger, we kind of live in this posture of braced. It's a bit of a tougher exterior. It's hard to get into that. And we're kind of held in this like almost fight position or this survival position of like, I'm ready for whatever happens. But when we're in that position, our body is mobilized towards making sure that we stay alive. That's the goal of our nervous system, is to keep us alive, which again, we'll talk about in the next episode. And so when we live our lives in that posture all the time, like there's not room for stuff to move around. Like, again, if you were watching me, like I don't have much mobility with my arms when I'm in this braced position, right? What happened is once I knew, and going back to that car accident, once I knew I was safe, I had enough trauma training at this point that I was like, all right, I know what's going to happen next in my body, because my body knew I could look around and see I'm safe. I'm alive. The accident has happened. It is over, but I am okay. And so all of a sudden, I let go of my steering wheel. My body started to relax a little bit, and everybody was kind of gathering on the other side of the road. So I got out of my car to go to the other side of the road, and I could feel my whole body starting to shake and just needed to get that energy out. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's all these people that are watching me walk across the road. And I was like, I don't even care. And I just let my body shake out, and I was kind of flailing for a couple seconds. And in my mind, I was like, my life, my well-being is worth more than looking silly in front of these people. And so I'm like, I'm just going to let my body do whatever my body needs to do to get out that energy that I had from bracing. And so I did. And not shockingly, I've been okay since that point. You know, it was a little scary to get in the car the next, week or two after that or whatever. I was like, oh, I don't know, is somebody going to hit me? But I've never suffered flashbacks from that. I've never, because I was able to move that energy through me rather than keeping it trapped in my body. But for many of us growing up in high control religion, we don't have the opportunity to do that. We just keep it trapped in our body in that braced position. So when we finally do let go, like we are safe and we can go out and down, our body goes, I've been holding a lot in for a very long time. And now we can do something about it. But that unto itself can feel really overwhelming, because all of a sudden now there's this energy that's trying to get out in all these different ways, physiologically and psychologically.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that, first of all. I appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to just whether it's a car accident or just any other experience in life, and I am curious on that note too, what when it comes to different, because you look up on like Psychology Today, a new therapist, and it's like everybody, there's like so many things that folks do, modalities, that is, like whether it's EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, and that's just three of the big ones. Like there's so many. What would you say, like if somebody were to ask you, like what would you recommend as being the top modalities that are effective at helping to heal from trauma, religious trauma in particular, but even just trauma?
Yeah. Well, if people have followed me for a while, or maybe not even a while, 5 minutes, you'll know that I'm a big body-based trauma resolution person. So I am a somatic experiencing practitioner, which means that I've gone through their training. So I very much believe in that, but I've kind of morphed my own modality out of that and a couple others, because I love parts work, but I won't steal it from you. You can talk about that. But I do believe this. So in therapy world, we talk about two different kinds of modalities. We talk about top-down modalities and body-up modalities. So top-down are your modalities that you're going to use for like thinking. We're talking CBT, DBT, ACT, cognitive things, behavioral things. We're thinking about them, trying to change our thoughts, change our behaviors. Body up modalities are modalities where you're working in and around and on your body to heal whatever it is that's happening. But I'm a big believer that when we're talking about complex trauma, we need both. We need to be able to, for instance, learn how to think differently when we're talking about fundamentalist thinking, but we also need to resolve how that lives in our body. So yeah, I take a very holistic approach. And so I use everything from somatic experiencing, attachment methods, internal family systems, trauma-informed stabilization techniques. Those are probably some of my go-tos. Mindfulness, self-compassion, mindfulness-based self-compassion. If I ever do CBT, it is mindfulness-based CBT, not straight CBT. And I honestly use DBT when I'm doing the top-down modalities, because sometimes when we are talking about trauma, we we need to what's called get somebody stabilized. We need to give somebody some very practical skills and resources of how to navigate distress tolerance or emotional regulation or thinking differently. So DBT is usually my go-to, though I do want to learn more about ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. And I know that's something you do. So yeah, what would you say, Mr. Parts Work?
Yeah. Well, so for those who don't know, now I do parts work, which is internal family systems, parts work. You can kind of use those interchangeably a lot.
Yep.
And, yeah, I mean, I think what you said, though, I think a balance of both. I think a good clinician will recognize that every client's not the same and that you can kind of ebb and flow. And like, there's some clients that, we've approached using IFS from a pretty cognitive cerebral place, but it's worked really well. And then there's others where it's kind of like, they're like, I've done that work. They're like, it's like, it needs to be more just body based. So bottom up rather than top down. Yeah. We're not trying to identify thought patterns and internal narratives. We're rather just, where do you notice XYZ showing up in your body? What does that feel like? Can you notice that? And it just many things you can do from that perspective. And I think it just really depends, but I definitely do parts work. So IFS a lot, and somatic experiencing is great. And so there actually is a thing called somatic IFS, and that's probably the closest thing that I do, although not strictly. I bring in bits of attachment theory, bits of acceptance and commitment, therapy as well. And I have been actually pretty extensively trained in that specifically. But yeah, it's also, I'm not saying that everything works equally well, but I do think that there can be a lot of flexibility and creativity there, and every client is different. I think really that's the biggest piece, is that as a clinician, for me, just speaking to myself, like I just need to check myself. I'll even tell clients, like, I think IFS works great for a lot of folks. I don't think it's the gold standard by which all other modalities must be judged. So if it doesn't work for you, if it doesn't resonate, you're not going to hurt my feelings. That's fine. We can be creative, collaborative, and find other things that might work for you.
Yeah.
And we've done that sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, like what you just said, is being able to find somebody who will be flexible to work with you and to say, oh, hey, this isn't working. Okay, we can try something different. And yeah. And I think along that too, we talked about the difference between trauma resolution and trauma recovery. And, I think in the most ideal world, everybody would be able to find a practitioner who is trauma trained in like a body-based modality, who can both help them resolve their trauma, as well as knows all the ins and outs of high control religion. And the fact of the matter is that, well, it exists, obviously, like, because we're doing this work, right? We work at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. All of the practitioners are doing that, but that's not accessible to everybody either.
Right.
And so sometimes it means then you have to kind of piece things together and find people that are a good fit for you, whether that's coaches, therapists, other support groups, things like that. That you go, hey, this person may not know about religious trauma, but they know about trauma, and they can help me with this. And then this other person knows about the religious trauma part, and so I can do some of the recovery work with them. Or this other person does, body-based techniques on a massage table, and that is really good for my body to get some movement there. So there's so many different things that we can use, and I just encourage people to be patient with yourself. This is not often a fast process. And I think especially coming out of high control religion, we're like, all right, let's just jump in. Let's just do this. Let's get this done. And it's often not like that. Even the most motivated people are like, actually having to slow down is the best way to do it. And going slower actually allows you to go faster in the long run. Yeah. Don't be discouraged if you don't heal overnight. You didn't get to this place overnight, right? It came over years and decades. And so it will just take your body some time to lean in to those new ways of healing and coping and navigating. But it pays off. It does. In the little moments, in the big moments, it does pay off.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. And it does take a while.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's like, and I often say this to folks, it's like, healing's not linear. It's not like this destination that we need to get to this place, and once we're there, we've arrived. Because if you look at it that way, yeah, understandably, you're going to be, checking Google Maps, like, well, how much farther is it? Like, like it said 4 hours 3 hours ago, and it still says 4 hours. You know, like, you're gonna like that mentality of like, I'm running late for this appointment, and it's like it really is like that. It's really just about this trajectory. Yeah, I mean, it can take time, but also I think the sooner we accept that, realize that, and stop looking at it as this destination that we're late to, that we're trying to get to, things do become so much better as far as just quality of life, distress or the lack thereof, the way that it shows up.
I remember like just such a very clear moment. This was years ago now, where, I'd been doing a lot of my own work, and, you have those moments where you're like, is this really doing anything? Like, am I really changing? Like, whatever. And I happened to be dating somebody at the time, and I was a very anxious person also. And I had this moment where I was standing in my living room, almost this out of body experience. And I'm like, right now is when I should be getting anxious with this person, but I'm okay. Like, I'm okay in myself. And I was like, this is that healing. It's what they talk about. Like, I'm doing it. I'm living it right now. And you actually like have those real living moments where you're like, I am literally responding differently in this situation than I used to respond. And those are such moments of celebration where you're like, oh yeah, this is working, and I love that I had such a distinct moment of being like, oh yeah, I'm okay. It's pretty cool. And those are great moments to have with clients too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, Andrew, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation, what are some of your kind of go-to resources for yourself, or that you point clients to, whether that's books or podcasts or, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I always make the joke that, like, I recommend so many books, or at least I'm capable of recommending so many books. So it's kind of like, I always ask a client, like, do you want book recommendations? Because I'm not trying to like just dump more books onto your to be read pile. If you're like me, I have a huge to be read pile. That being said, if I can, there is one book like I do pretty much universally recommend, at least if you're interested at all in internal family systems, part work, which is, that's kind of what I do. And the book is called No Bad Parts. No Bad Parts. It's by Dr. Richard Schwartz, which is the guy who created IFS many, many years ago. The book itself is not that old. Now, he's written other books on it, but this is the most recent one. I think it came out, it was in the pandemic. It might have been 2021, actually, that it was first published, I think. So it's not an old book. It's not a textbook, nor is it a clinical manual, but it is thorough, and it has exercises in each chapter that I think is super accessible. You do not have to have a background in IFS or any kind of counseling or psychology for it to be helpful. Like, anybody can take it and run with it. So yeah, I definitely recommend that to everybody.
Yeah, it is a good one. And I do have it on good authority that Mr. Dick Schwartz is very well aware of the religious trauma field and how parts work interacts with that. So like, on a personal level, I know this, which is like very exciting, and very curious to see kind of how he navigates some of that as well.
It is interesting. So, he makes a few vague references in the first couple of chapters of the book that would demonstrate that he's aware of how high control religion can be problematic in the context of parts work. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. I love that book too. And for everybody, I will make sure that all of these recommendations are in the show notes. I, of course, love the work of Peter Levine, who is the creator of Somatic Experiencing. My favorite two of his books are, one is like really tiny little kind of a shorter book called Healing Trauma, really original.
It's a good one.
But what I love about it is very practical. You can take it, you can learn skills, you can not only have a cognitive understanding of trauma, but he teaches you skills to start building that sense of internal safety, which makes it feel very like you're in control. You're being empowered to heal yourself. And then his longer book, In an Unspoken Voice, is probably one of my more influential books on my own life in just understanding the complexity of trauma and how that lives in somebody's body. That was one of the first trauma books that I read as a therapist. I'm going to totally unshamelessly plug my own book, which is When Religion Hurts You by me, Healing from Religious Trauma and the Impact of High Control Religion. This is not a manual to healing, but it does address more specifically religious trauma and what that kind of looks like in your body and the different component parts of healing. It gives you kind of maybe a starting point. And yeah, any other books that you have, Andrew, or podcasts?
I would very much recommend folks check out the resource list that we have on our website, because I was actually looking through that just the other day and was thinking like, oh, this is actually a great list. I need to stop reinventing the wheel and just send some clients here, because it's organized too. Like, well, I'll have clients ask, not
yes,
like,
we try, yeah.
Like I'll have a client maybe ask for a specific book, fair enough, but then they'll just in general say, well, what books in general would you recommend for this? And I actually would I really would recommend folks go there, because it is organized well. So like different like subtopics within the realm of trauma. And yeah.
So if you go to traumaresolutionandrecovery.com and click the resources button, there's plenty of websites as well as a link to our bookshop. And that bookshop is updated and organized well so that, like Andrew was talking about, the different subtopics. And then I also feel like it's worth noting that, we also have a newsletter that you can sign up for, which always has some different resources on it. So if you go to traumaresolutionandrecovery.com, there's usually a little pop-up and you can just like stick your email in there and you can get our newsletter. We won't spam you. We'll just send it out, once a month, and you can get some resources. But then also, if you are looking for somebody to work with on an individual level, or maybe you have a partner or a family, we've got practitioners at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. All of us are trauma trained and have experience in high control religion, purity culture, adverse religious experiences. So we start at a baseline of, yes, it was that bad. No, you do not need to convince us. It wasn't just a bad church experience. And that unto itself can feel really helpful and healing as you're a part of this work. So yeah, you can go to our websites, traumaresolutionandrecovery.com. And then there's a button right on there that says work with a practitioner, and you can see all the different ones available. Sign up for a free inquiry call, and then you can begin working with somebody.
Yeah, definitely excited. Yeah, always excited to hear from new prospective clients. So
yes, definitely. Well, I feel like we've done an okay job tackling the what is religious trauma. Any final thoughts or anything you want to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, I think the main thing that I would say is that whether you worked with a therapist before in the past or have never at all, I guess really all I would say is like, I just really recognize how much courage and vulnerability it takes to reach out. Not even to me, but just in general. Like I don't need you to work with me. But just getting out there and actually really, really taking control of like that journey for yourself, whatever that looks like. I really just appreciate people, and I don't take that lightly. And, I guess that's that's what's on my mind right now. So that's, what I wanted to say.
I mean, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that's probably a good place to land, and we can say, all God's people said.
Amen.
Amen.